There's no name that strikes fear into the heart of animation fans like the Minions. Just look at them, staring at you, laughing at you, polluting your Facebook feed with misspelled philosophical ramblings about nothing. I've made it no secret that I hate the Minions and everything that they've done for animation. And of course, my Patreons have requested that I go after their movie. This should be fun. I suppose I should start with some background about why I hate the Minions themselves. It's easy to call them poorly designed, but that's actually the furthest thing from the truth. The Minions are some of the best designed characters in animation. That's not a good thing. They're well designed like an advertisement or, say, a cereal box. Their sole focus is in their appeal and how they can stay in the minds of kids for as long as possible. Think about it. The Minions themselves are just ovals with a couple of circles for eyes. This is so simple that even a very young child could draw them. They're also bright yellow, a color well known for its use in advertising. It's second only to red in how eye-catching it is, without the emotions that red often brings. It helps draw attention to them on the movie screen or, in I don't know, a toy store. It's no surprise that they became the dark horses of Illumination Pictures, especially with their random non-sequiturs, which happens to be perfect trailer fodder. But I must say, the worst thing about the Minions to me is that they're influential. So many hackneyed animated films have basically pilfered the Minions formula because it's really easy. It is stupidly easy to do. Just take some small round things, clone them a bunch of times, and have them spout gibberish for half the film. Anyone could do it. Not as well as the Minions, but they could do it. But that's not the only problem. A lot of great things in animation have had bad influences, like, say, South Park. I've gone on and on about the terrible influence that South Park has had on many adult cartoons and Comedy Central, trying to cash in on the South Park brand. The difference with the Minions is this. Have you ever seen a Minions clone actually work? Actually, let's change the question a little bit. Have you ever seen characters following the Minions formula that stood out, even a little bit? Characters that didn't make you immediately think that they're just ripping off the Minions? No, you probably haven't. I certainly haven't. It's always the same damn thing. Another thing about the Minions that bugs me is that they've allowed Illumination Pictures to thrive. I'm going to be honest, I don't like Illumination. Big surprise coming from an animation critic, but yeah. It's at a point where under no other circumstances would I actually watch an Illumination film. The reason is simple. I don't like the company. They lack artistic integrity. Their business model is literally making animated films as cheaply as possible, and you could tell that just by looking at them. I hate everything already went into how certain animal models were repeated verbatim all over in the film Sing. But Sing isn't the only Illumination film guilty of this. If I took a random background character from an Illumination movie, chances are you would not be able to tell me which movie it came from. I'm fairly sure that they use the same assets for all of their movies. Although I will say, making movies and animation profitable isn't a bad thing in and of itself. Obviously, you gotta make money somehow. But when the only thing you focus on is the profit, bad things happen. You get the shitty Flash cartoons of the 2000s, cash-ins like Cars 2, terrible cartoons from celebrities that clearly don't watch cartoons. Speaking of cash-ins, the Minions is my favorite type of cash-in. The give the comic relief their own spin-off cash-in. I think I went into plenty of detail about how this doesn't work in my Cars 2 review, but to recap, comic relief tends to work best in small doses. In movies like this, comic relief gets very oversaturated. Comic relief characters don't tend to have a lot of depth, so they have a very hard time carrying a story. Also, they have a very hard time pulling off serious plots, so these types of movies are all too often comedies, which goes against the point of a comic relief character, as in, it's in the name, comic relief. As in, relief from the drama. If everything is comedy, you're not getting relief from anything. The Minions movie takes all of these problems, escalates them, and adds in a few more. So, the Minions are these characters designed to grab your attention. What would happen if you just filled the screen with them? Oh, I don't know, 90% of their appeal would be muted. The other problem with making a film about the Minions is, well... They don't talk. You want me to sum up most of the film's problems? The Minions do not talk. That's not technically true as the Minions speak in gibberish, but it's functionally true. Anytime that the Minions speak amounts to basically dead air. I guess we should go over what dialogue is for in film. I know you learned this in like day -7 of storytelling school, but we should do a recap on the very, very basics. Dialogue can help establish character and character traits. So does Zabazubi Banana do this? No, it does not. This is why we need a narrator to essentially translate what the Minions just said.
For one minion had a plan. His name was Kevin. He was excited to share his idea with the tribe. He'd been preparing for days, weeks, months.
Dialogue could also help move the story along, unless it's dialogue in the Minions movie. Here we need to have the narrator state exactly what we just saw to slow the story down. Dialogue could also be funny, and you know what? Maybe Zabazubi Banana was funny the first time.
We've been working on this for a while. It's an anti-gravity serum. I meant to close that. He'll be alright, I'm sure.
But after, I don't know, 29,000 times, it gets kind of old. Speaking of that narrator, you're subbing this thing wrong. You're supposed to talk immediately as things are said. When you wait until after the minions say Zabi Zubi Banana and then tell us what they mean, it basically takes twice the time for the same amount of information to be conveyed. The smarter move, if you want a more cohesive story, is to use subtitles. But this movie is probably aimed at kids who can't read yet. And that's when you should figure out that these pieces do not go together. To tell you the very, very sad truth, silent films use dialogue better than this movie. Speaking of that, this movie tends to use the type of humor that you would find in silent films. What you need to know about silent films is that very few of them are what we'd call feature length, because the types of scenarios and humors that they establish wear out their welcome very quickly. I personally do like slapstick humor, and I like surreal humor, but if that's your entire movie, it's going to get annoying very fast. And do you know how long it took this particular movie to annoy me? Wow. Just wow. Less than 1 second. This movie took literally less than 1 second to annoy me. That is impressive. But let's get into the actual content of the movie, and maybe they'll pull off something fantastic with all of these things working against them. I mean, it actually starts with a very interesting philosophical lesson that has you thinking about your life as a whole. You see, minions exist throughout the ages, completely undying. The minions are eternal. They will always be there no matter what you accomplish during your lifetime. And they will be constantly destroying the world in which you live. In a way, being annoyed by the minions unites all life on Earth. It brings us together as a species. Whether you're a caveman, an Egyptian pharaoh, or Dracula. Dracula what? Okay, so the minion shtick is that they try to help out the evilest being that they can find. And during the Middle Ages, a time when there were a lot of pretty evil people, they picked the one who didn't exist. Sure, why not? So the minions find themselves, well, minions for some of the evilest people in history. Scratch that, this is a kid's movie. So not really the evilest people in history, just the kid-friendliest evilest people in history. It might sound like nitpicking, but it's to point out that there's absolutely no reason that this movie should be a historical movie. It just doesn't work with the concept of the minions at all. When you make a movie about characters trying to serve the evilest people in history, and also try to make it a kid's movie, something is not going to mesh. You're going to leave something out. That's all I'm saying. Also, for some reason, the prologue of this movie is longer than the Fellowship of the Rings. At no less than 7 minutes, we're finally introduced to one of our main characters, Kevin. His character trait is that he has no character traits. I guess he's determined, at least in this scene. It vanishes before too long. He's joined by Bob.
Bob was eager to go, but Kevin felt he was just not strong enough for the dangerous journey ahead.
This character dynamic also vanishes completely as the movie goes on. Our third main character is Stuart. Stuart is a musician, sometimes. There's a total of about 3 jokes in the entire movie that have anything to do with music. So between the 3 minions, we've got about half a personality. This is quite the problem.
Okay. No, no, come here.
Eventually, Bob's energy and enthusiasm, but mostly lack of other volunteers, changed Kevin's mind.
Yes, I know. I just saw that. Narration is supposed to be for things that the audience can't figure out for themselves. Luckily, after this scene, the narrator more or less vanishes completely. Okay, rule number 1 for a narrator. If you only use one at the beginning and the ending of your film, there's a very significant chance that you're using a narrator improperly. I don't know, I just find using a narrator only at the beginning of the film a very, very lazy way to establish tone or world or whatever.
Ah, okay. Tomato la pita de la poca. Mopa, la triba, findo le boss. Okay. Okay. La guetta, le big boss. Allez, Bob, come here.
You know, this could be really heartwarming if I knew what they were saying, but because I don't, you know how this works.
Ah, okay. Tomato la pita de la poca. Mopa, la triba, findo le boss. Okay. Okay. La guetta, le big boss. Allez, Bob.
Seriously, how do you think the actual screenplay for this film looked? So, a lot of nothing happens, and I mean a lot of nothing happens. Except for this. Well, at the very least, this movie comes with its own porn. Can't say that about many other films, can you? After all of this, they finally make it to New York City in the 1960s. Because if there's anything the kids of today love, it's pop culture references from the 60s. Sure, I as an adult get that joke, and things like the Beatles references that we'll be seeing, but considering how I feel about the rest of the movie, it really doesn't elevate anything for me. Especially because the references of the 60s that we get in this film are all very surface level jokes and references. Establishing a 60s setting with a Nixon joke like that is like establishing a 50s setting with Mr. Sandman. It's been done before. And when the Minions get to the protests, it's just too sanitized. Yes, I understand that it's a kids movie, and depicting the actual protests as they actually happened in the 60s would be a stretch too far, but showing them at all is kind of confusing. Some might even say that it's a touch disrespectful. The 60s was a tumultuous time. Things were crazy back then. I don't think it's impossible to make a kids film in a time period like the 1960s, but you need to ask yourself, why is this movie taking place in the 60s? And you need to be very, very mindful of the context, considering what was going on in the 60s. And spoiler alert, it wasn't happy hijinks and bright smiling yellow faces like the Minions want to present. The first thing the Minions do when they get to New York City is find something more suitable to wear. So that's how the Minions got their iconic appearance. They found clothes on a clothesline. A human clothesline, with clothes that don't fit human anatomy at all. Makes perfect sense. Quick tip, when establishing backstory or background, no answer is infinitely better than a bad answer. Then we have a montage. This film has a lot of montages because it's really hard to make a plot for characters who have no fucking personality and can't speak whatsoever. Eventually, Bob gets separated, so they chase him into a mall. And during this time, Bob comes to a room filled with mirrors, which leads to a very, very weird scene.
Les bodies? Mais, Kelamaka! Kelamaka, les bodies! Hey, c'est là-bas! Hey, les bodies! No?
Bob thinks that they're all more minions. He runs into them, then realizes that they're just his reflection, and looks at them sadly. This could have been a very touching scene if Bob wasn't the one who was most excited and eager to leave. And also, this is only 10 minutes after they left their home. It's a little early to be feeling homesick. This is the kind of scene you're supposed to get like halfway through the movie, or towards the end even. So it's not very dramatic. But don't worry, their attempts at comedy aren't much better than their attempts at drama. In the next scene, the Minions are watching a dating game show. They're invested because the contestants all have the same name as the Minions. I don't get the joke. Maybe if the Minions we're watching looked more similar to the Minions on the television screen, it would be a little bit funnier, but it's just people with the same name as the Minions, that's it. Then the picture dies. Through this television, they uncover a secret channel that tells them about a villain named Scarlet Overkill, who is going to be at a Villain Con. You know, Villain Con, like Comic-Con. The first of which was in the 1970s. In all seriousness, I do not know why the filmmakers made this film in a historical setting. Historical settings take a ton of extra work and research, which they clearly didn't want to do. There's plenty of little inaccuracies throughout the entire damn film. And yeah, kids probably aren't going to notice, but then again, kids probably aren't going to care that it takes place in the 60s. So in essence, the people who would like this film for its 1960s aesthetic would probably be disappointed by the flubs in its research. You don't tend to get these issues in Disney or Pixar films when they take take place in historical settings, because there's no reason not to fact-check your work. Unless, of course, you're just being lazy and trying to chase after a cheap buck. So, the next aspect of this movie is the Minions trying to get to Orlando. Considering that it could have been reasonable for the Minions to just randomly stumble upon this villain con, after all, they randomly stumbled upon the commercial for it, this entire sequence in New York City has been 100% pointless. It has done literally nothing for the plot, unless you're really interested in seeing Stort make out with a fire hydrant. So the Minions end up hitchhiking with a family in one of the more interesting scenes in the movie. These are the Nelsons. At first, they appear to be an innocent, everyday family. However, before long, it's revealed that they're actually a family of villains. They rob a bank and get into a high-speed chase.
Dad, we got company. It's because I tripped the alarm. I stink.
Hey, we all make mistakes, Sugar Plum. You're still learning.
The family all has a really good chemistry, and these characters are actually very likable. And a family of villains is just an interesting concept. It's clearly the best part of the movie.
Your father's right, Tina.
Reload.
He wasn't this good at being evil overnight.
Reload.
Your time's coming.
What makes the scene strange is that even though it's the best part of the movie, it makes me hate the movie even more. Illumination, you could have made a movie about a happy family of villains trying to be supervillains. Instead, you decide to make a movie about lemon-flavored Tic Tacs with no real plot speaking gibberish. Please let this be a plot for one of the Incredibles movies. Please, it's all gold on a plate that Illumination doesn't want to touch. Meanwhile, the other Minions are depressed, but then they're not. They found a Yeti that they get to be their master. Said master ends up getting killed later on, so this part of the movie is also 100% pointless. So the Minions get to VillainCon, where what they do essentially amounts to another montage. This brings us up to 4 montages. Minions throughout history, Minions traveling to New York, the Minions exploring New York, and now this one in VillainCon. 4 montages in the first third of the film. Them trying to become the minions of random supervillains scattered about doesn't add anything, because they've already established that Scarlet is the villain that they're going to try to work with. Twice now, actually. This would have some suspense if this happened after Scarlet, refused to take them aboard. And now we get introduced to Scarlet for, I guess, the 3rd time. And of course, she's hiring. So how do the Minions become her henchmen? Oh, I don't know, the same way they do literally everything. The Minions run around a lot, they end up in a slapstick situation, and the plot moves completely out of their incompetence.
Wow. Who are you, my knights in shining denim?
Yep. Also, the Grim Reaper is in this movie. Sure, why not? We have Dracula in this movie, and the Swamp Man. So I guess the Grim Reaper fits. Although I wouldn't call him much of a villain per se, because one day he will do the good deed of stripping my memory of this movie. And now the Minions are off on their way to England. Another movie spin-off based on a comic relief that shouldn't exist that ends in England. Maybe it's just a coincidence that this movie keeps reminding me of Cars 2, or maybe it's just a dirge of creativity. For what it's worth, Scarlet Overkill is probably the best character in the movie, with the exception of the supervillain family. She can get really over the top and insane, and her reactions and how she crosses the line into pure insanity are definitely endearing, even though I have seen this kind of character before. Her husband Herb, on the other hand, is there, I guess. Although, he probably shouldn't be. Also, Kevin kind of had a crush on Scarlet that was seen in a couple of brief Imagine spots. Then he didn't, as soon as Herb joined the picture. You could have had a really funny reaction of Kevin learning that Scarlet has a husband. Or maybe you couldn't, because in terms of holding a story or telling jokes, the Minions are painfully limited. But this is what I mean when I say that they don't have any real established characters. In one scene, they're given any sort of trait, but then they're forgotten about for the rest of the film. Kevin has a crush on Scarlet. Then he doesn't. It's honestly just lazy. But that's the Illumination method. Put in as little effort as possible. Come up with a bare minimum of jokes, even if they're not appropriate for the characters. This might work for the Despicable Me movies where there's just a ton of nondescript minions, but when you give specific ones names and a base personality, we're expecting you to stick with them.
Do you know who this is?
La cucaracha?
Yes, Kevin, that looks exactly like a cockroach. If you're going to base your gibberish language on a real-life language, make sure that the jokes that you're saying make some sort of sense, please. The Minions are then instructed to get the Queen of England's crown, because Scarlet wants to be a princess. Then the Minions are given super secret agent gadgets, because this movie will not stop reminding me of Cars 2. Maybe that's because mediocre kids movies tend to have a lot in common. Then Scarlet tells the Minions that she wants the Queen of England's crown. Again. Does every single scene in this movie need to happen twice? So the next day at the Tower of London, which the movie informs us is indeed in London, the Minions try to get in by, are you fucking serious? The 3 kids in a trench coat bit. And they're playing it as a vanilla joke. A vanilla joke that's been so cliche that it's been mocked and parodied and ridiculed for years now. They really think they can get away with telling a joke that bare bones. Really. Then the minions run into some guards, which get hypnotized to strip dance. What the fuck is with this movie? This is still a kid's film, right? Then they come across a blind man. In another instance where I have no idea what the joke even is. I guess the blind man is cartoon comedy blind, which means that he can see completely and is super good at combat and shit. Until a suit of armor's helmet falls on his head and he can't see anymore. I know that you don't want to have any of the scenes to connect to each other, but can you at least keep continuity within the same scene, please? The guy is essentially blind and is hinted to be pretty much deaf as well, and yet the minions are able to escape when an armor helmet falls on his head and blinds him. What? Whatever, let's just move on. The crown falls down into the floor and is given to the queen as she rides around town. So the minions follow after her and we have a good old-fashioned police chase. Now, don't think about the fact that we already had a police chase in this movie. This scene is totally different. This one takes place in a different country. During this police chase, Bob pulls out the sword and the stone and becomes the King of England. King of what? King of what? The King of England. Okay. King of England. During a police chase in the 1960s, Bob pulls out the sword and the stone, and he becomes the King of England. Sure, why not? We're writing minions. We can make up everything as we go. Just put the most ridiculous fucking thing on the paper and just go with it. Yes. Do you know what we haven't had in a good long while? Another montage. This one is totally unique. It's the minions traveling, complete with a moon landing joke, because you can't have a movie taking place in the 1960s without making a moon landing conspiracy joke. Only half credit though, guys, because that director looks nothing like Stanley Kubrick. So Bob has all the guards change into minions attire, and he even changes the flag. And I feel like I need to apologize to the whole damn country because of this movie for this scene. Am I the only one who feels that way? Oh, it's like that scene from earlier. This really shows that the minions have made it. They've completed their quest. They're somewhere where they always wanted to be by completely abandoning and betraying what they set out to do. This story is happy end. Also, whenever they keep saying King Bob, all I can think of is this.
I'm Big Bob Pataki, the Beeper King.
Is it just me? Do you know what this movie needs? Another montage. Actually, no it shouldn't. Because no movie should have this many montages. Okay. Montages, almost by necessity, are parts of the movie where the plot comes to a complete stop. I'm seriously curious as to how much of this movie is actually important for the story that it wants to tell. Because this whole King Bob shit is entirely pointless. Another entirely pointless scene. Scarlet comes in the end and ends up wanting to kill the minions. That's what the King Bob shit establishes. Do you know what else could have achieved that effect? If they had successfully stolen the crown and given it to her. Scarlet is a supervillain. I can buy that she'd want to kill the minions for any number of reasons. I know this because I want to kill the minions, and I'm not even a supervillain. Anymore, at least. I'd be more forgiving if these scenes were funny, but they're not. They're just repetitive in the worst ways. You'd get the same effect by staring at Minions-themed postcards. So, Scarlet sends the minions to the dungeon where they run across Herb.
Look at Herb.
Who's this handsome herb fella? No, my name is Blurb. I'm a dungeon master.
Alright, Blurb. Should I roll initiative? Before we begin the encounter, though, I have to ask, is the pizza cutter going to be important for anything?
Wow, harder than I thought.
You know, I'm trying to avoid making jokes about how the minions look like penises, but scenes like this don't really help. After what amounts to another montage, Herb is called up to Scarlet's coronation, and the minions escape through the fucking sewers. Really? Are you shitting me? No, really, are you shitting me? The minions escape through an easy access, easily open sewer grate in a dungeon, one that's probably very far below the ground. It's also a medieval dungeon, something that probably existed before there were sewers in London. Alright, I get it. It's a comedy. So maybe they put in the most cliched goddamn way to break out of a dungeon in the movie as a joke. except they don't make any jokes out of it. Then again, how they got into the dungeon was also pretty cliche, so what the hell was I expecting? Seriously, how is this movie the second most profitable animated film of all time, with jokes and plot points this incredibly weak sauce? While walking through the sewers, the minions end up stealing a wreath from a funeral. That's awful! And strangely enough, it's more relevant to the plot than Bob becoming King of England. A bee comes out of the wreath and chases the minion around a chandelier, which ends up falling on Scarlet, which looks like it may have killed her. Hey, a fake-out death! That's exactly what this movie needs. Just because it's a villain going through a fake-out death doesn't mean that it isn't a cliche that needs to die. But then again, this movie is making it its mission to use every single cliche imaginable. Also, let's have a third chase scene. I also want to point out a continuity error. Right outside the church, when they were going in, it was sunny and clear skies. And now, like 5 minutes later, it's lightning and thunderstorms with no transition whatsoever. This might seem like a small nitpick, but then you realize that this is an animated film when they can choose what the weather is in every single scene. So they had to intentionally do this. Eventually, Kevin finds his way to the Queen, which has nothing to do with anything. You know that jokes are more funny when they have something to do with the plot? This may sound backwards if you're someone who works on something like the Minions movie, but jokes based on established characters and established character traits are infinitely more funny than just random characters doing random things because random funny. Like, the Queen doesn't even have to be here. What Kevin does is he sees Stuart and Bob on the television in the bar.
Kevin, I know you're out there. You think you've gotten away? Well, what do we have here?
Hello.
Oh my goodness.
Stuart?
Which one shall I kill first? Little Bob? Stuart? Bob? Stuart? I will do it, Kevin, if you are not back here by dawn.
Yes, come here, Kevin, so I can kill all three of you, or else I'm going to kill just two of you. Perfect plan, Scarlet. So then Kevin becomes a kaiju monster. Do you care as to why? If you didn't expect that to happen in the climax of the Minions movie, I have no idea what you've been smoking.
This is it, boys. Things do not look good for you. Oh, and I'm keeping the bear. You're not gonna need him where you're going. Heaven.
The Minions going to heaven. The Minions are going to heaven. That's the funniest joke in the entire movie, because there are so many things wrong with it. Like, even in context. The concept of the Minions is that they made it their mission to help out the evilest people in history. If that's your mission, it doesn't matter how cute you look and how much you cuddle up with a stuffed bear. You don't go to heaven. So, the final battle of this movie is between a kaiju monster and a woman who turns into a rocket ship. But only after we make a pee joke.
That's your plan? Make yourself a bigger target?
She says as she misses every single shot. Even when there's a million of them, she fails to hit one of them. Hell, she shoots over them. Even if you're intentionally trying to miss every single one of them, it would be a challenge to do so. How do you become the greatest supervillain in the world when you miss the largest target possible and a horde of small targets completely? Seriously, just try randomly dropping shit on a pile of ants and see how long it takes until you actually miss. So if anything proves that they probably wrote this movie in one draft, it's the ending. The Minions end up completely cheering Kevin on, even though he completely screwed up his mission. Why are these guys cheering? The person that he told them that they were working for is now trying to kill him, and all of them. Kevin has screwed up, and the only way out of this is to screw up more. Kevin eats a bomb and tries to get Scarlet to explode. You know, the person he told all of his friends that they were working for? Like, the Minions, they're not good guys. That's the concept of the Minions. How does the Minions movie fail to understand the concept of the Minions? Do you know what this movie needs, though? The only thing that could possibly save it. A second fake-out death. Despite the fact that this terrible cliche already happened once in the movie, my outrage towards this is probably a lot higher than you'd expect. They pull off my least favorite animation cliche twice. That is astounding to me. And they do it in probably the worst way possible. Kevin ends up living with no explanation whatsoever. He's now just tiny now, and he parachutes down in his overalls. And then the minions are regarded as heroes by all of England. You know, the characters that dedicated themselves to helping the forces of evil. Isn't this like a super bad ending for the minions? Like, one of the worst endings possible? They tried to work for villains and do evil in the world, and yet they're heroes of England. The minions still aren't serving an evil master. Not only that, but they just ended up killing or destroying the reputation of one of the biggest, most famous supervillains in the world. One whom many other supervillains looked up to. How is this a good ending in context? Well, this movie definitely has had more thought put into it than Reanimated. It still looks like they were going through it with the bare minimum amount of effort. But that's Illumination Films for you. If they were a student in school, they would pass all their classes with a flat 60% and never try to do anything better than that. So many of the pieces of this film just do not go together. I understand that the Minions are a very hard concept to work with, but I'm not the one who decided to make a feature-length film about a bunch of characters that were all essentially identical with no defining character traits that couldn't speak in anything but gibberish. But it's like someone said, let's make a movie about the Minions, and then someone else said, alright, let's brainstorm how this could work. And then the second guy was shot in the head, fired, and then fired out of a cannon. I'm trying not to ask for much here, but how hard is it for a movie with a lot less filler, a plot that actually makes some kind of sense, and an ending that connects to the rest of the movie? Or maybe even a movie that just achieves what it set out to do. You see, the movie set out to tell the origin of the Minions, and it neither tells us how they were created or how they started working for Gru. It tries to give certain Minions a personality, but nothing about any of them is consistent. Tell me 2 character traits about Stuart. Or Kevin, for instance. 2 ways that they're completely different from all other Minions throughout the entire movie. The story tries to be about them finding a boss, but it's only about them searching for this boss for like half of the movie. So many scenes are just pointless or redundant. I'm not exaggerating when I can say you could probably cut out 2/3 of this movie and nothing would be lost. This movie could have easily been cut down to a short film at the beginning of Despicable Me 3. And not to mention, a lot of it is just obnoxiously self-congratulatory. Then again, this is an Illumination film, and the Minions are really the only thing keeping them ahead of Blue Sky. I could say more, but I'd just be repeating myself at this point, and this movie has done enough of that for me. Like I said in the beginning, this movie was voted on by my Patreons. You can become a Patreon now and check out some of my new revamped rewards. Every 6 months, I'll be reviewing a new movie, and you can join me in the polling if you donate. A further donation can have you be one of the lucky ones to select the movie for the poll. And you can get these and many other rewards at patreon.com/MrEnter. Pretty much everything I earn on Patreon goes back into the channel, whether it's paying for my editor or doing things like buying a new microphone for this particular review. Every single dollar really does help me out, and I do hope that you will donate so I can do more reviews like this in the future.